Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your alarm clock is a hungry sow's squeal, your office is ankle-deep in substances you can't identify, and your coworkers might literally eat you if you fall down. Welcome to the medieval pig farm, a place where the phrase, bringing home the bacon meant you'd survived another day without losing a limb, contracting a zoonotic disease, or being crushed under several hundred pounds of ornery pork. Picture this. It's roughly 4:30 in the morning, sometime around 1320 CE, and you're about to discover that everything you thought you knew about farming from cute children's books and petting zoos was a comfortable lie. The reality? You're cold. You're exhausted before you've even started. And that charming oink oink sound you remember from cartoons is actually a deafening cacophony of aggressive snorts, territorial squeals, and the occasional bone-chilling scream when the herd's pecking order gets violently renegotiated. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you in Tokyo at noon? London at midnight? Somewhere in between? I'm always curious who's joining me for these historical deep dives. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins in darkness so complete you can barely see your own hands. There's no electricity, obviously, no gentle sunrise alarm, no smartphone buzzing on a nightstand. Instead, you're jolted awake by a combination of factors. The rooster's crow, which is less charming and more ear-splitting when it's 2 feet from your head. The cold seeping through your thin straw mattress, and most urgently, the knowledge that if you're not at the pig enclosure before dawn, you'll face the wrath of the reeve, the Lord's enforcer, who has exactly zero sympathy for overslept peasants. You roll off your sleeping platform, which is really just a wooden frame with some straw and maybe, if you're lucky, a wool blanket that smells like every person and animal who's ever used it. Your back already aches. You're maybe 25 years old, but your spine feels 50 because you've been doing manual labor since you could walk. The medieval pig farm doesn't have a minimum age requirement or workers' compensation. In the darkness, you fumble for your tunic, the same one you wore yesterday and the day before and, honestly, will wear until it literally disintegrates off your body. Medieval peasants didn't have casual Friday versus work clothes. You had 1, maybe 2 outfits total, and washing them was an occasional event, not a daily ritual. You pull on your brays, basically medieval underwear pants, your tunic, and if it's particularly cold, maybe a second layer. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are leather strips wrapped around your feet and bound with cord. Comfortable? No. Better than barefoot in a pigsty? Marginally. The air inside your cottage, and I'm using that term generously for what's essentially a one-room structure with a thatched roof, is thick with smoke from the fire pit that never quite goes out. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, which means you've spent your entire life breathing with smoke. Your lungs would horrify a modern pulmonologist. You grab a heel of dark bread from yesterday, hard enough to break teeth, and maybe dip it in some small beer, weak ale that's safer than water, before heading out. Stepping outside is like entering a void. The village is silent except for a few other unfortunates stumbling toward their morning duties. There are no streetlights, no helpful signs, just a vague knowledge of where you're supposed to be. The stars overhead are spectacular. Medieval people had zero light pollution, but you barely notice because you're too busy trying not to trip over a rock or step in something unpleasant. Most medieval villages kept communal animals, including pigs, who were allowed to roam freely and defecate with abandon. You make your way toward the pig enclosure, which you can smell long before you can see it. And here's your first harsh reality check. Medieval pigs were not the pink, plump, relatively docile creatures you see at modern farms. These were semi-feral animals, closer to wild boar than anything else, with coarse hair, bad attitudes, and a survival instinct that made them aggressive when hungry, which was basically always. They could weigh anywhere from 150 to 300 pounds, had sharp teeth, and absolutely would bite you if given the opportunity. The pig enclosure itself is a rough affair. Wooden fencing that needs constant repair because the pigs keep damaging it, either accidentally through their sheer bulk or deliberately because they're smart enough to know that freedom means more food. Inside this perimeter, you've got anywhere from 20 to 50 pigs, depending on the size of the manor's operation. They're packed in tighter than modern regulations would ever allow, creating a concentrated zone of smell, noise, and aggression. Your first task of the day, before the sun has even considered rising, is preparing the slop. And let me tell you, slop is an extremely accurate term. You're heading to a large wooden trough or barrel where the previous day's kitchen waste has been fermenting overnight. We're talking about vegetable peelings, spoiled grain, scraps of food that even the desperately hungry peasants wouldn't eat, all mixed together in a fragrant stew of decay. In summer, this mixture buzzes with flies and occasionally writhes with maggots. In winter, you might have to break through a layer of ice to access it. Historians have documented that medieval pig slop often included things that would turn a modern stomach. Fish heads, bones with scraps of meat still clinging to them, moldy bread, and basically anything organic that couldn't be used elsewhere. The medieval waste not, want not philosophy meant pigs got everything. They were living garbage disposals, which actually made them incredibly valuable. A pig could transform literal trash into protein. You grab a wooden bucket, no metal here, that's far too expensive, and start ladling this fragrant mixture into feeding troughs. The smell is indescribable. Imagine garbage that's been sitting in the sun for a week, mixed with sour milk with top notes of decomposition. Your nose actually adapts to it over time, which is either a blessing or a sign that you've permanently damaged your olfactory system. Probably both. But here's where it gets dangerous. The pigs know what that bucket means. They know the sound of your footsteps, and they're already worked up into a feeding frenzy before you've even entered the enclosure. As you unlatch the gate, making sure to do it quickly and get inside before any escape artist pigs make a break for it, you're immediately surrounded by snorting, shoving, aggressive animals who are not interested in polite cueing. Medieval sources occasionally mention farmhands being injured or even killed by pigs during feeding times. These weren't gentle animals. They'd knock you down, trample you, and keep eating while you tried to crawl away. The dominant pigs, usually the largest sows, would shoulder their way to the front, and any pig or human in their way was getting moved one way or another. You've learned through painful experience to keep moving, to not plant your feet in one spot because that makes you a stationary obstacle to be knocked aside. You're doing this weird shuffling dance, swinging the bucket, trying to distribute food to multiple troughs so the pigs spread out instead of concentrating in one murderous scrum. Your legs are already covered in bruises from being hip-checked by 200-pound sows. One particularly aggressive pig named, well, you don't name them because that makes slaughter day harder, has already taken a chunk out of your calf with her teeth. The wound from last week is still healing, poorly, with no antibiotics or proper cleaning supplies available. And here's a fun medieval fact. Pigs were so valuable and so prone to causing chaos that many English villages had specific laws about pig management. The swineherd was an actual official position, and there were regulations about when pigs could roam freely, usually autumn, when they could forage for acorns and nuts in the forest, versus when they needed to be penned up. Some historians still argue whether medieval pigs were truly domesticated, or if they were better classified as loosely managed wild animals who occasionally tolerated human presence. As you're finishing the feeding, trying to make sure even the weaker, smaller pigs get some food without getting yourself killed in the process, the sky is just barely starting to lighten. That pre-dawn glow that painters love? You're too exhausted to appreciate it. You've been awake maybe an hour, and you've already done physical labor that would qualify as a full workout in the modern world, all before breakfast in the dark, surrounded by animals that view you as either a food source or an annoying obstacle. But wait, there's more. Because feeding the pigs is just the opening act. You've still got to check for overnight casualties. Pigs sometimes killed each other, especially piglets who were too weak. Inspect the fencing for new damage, and oh yes, there's the small matter of the mucking out, which we'll get to later. Right now, your immediate concern is that one of the sows looks like she might be going into labor, which is both potentially profitable and potentially disastrous, because medieval pig birth had about the same survival rate as rolling dice, and you're the one who'll be blamed if the piglets don't make it. Your hands are already cold, already dirty, and the sun isn't even up yet. You've got at least 15 more hours of this ahead of you. Welcome to day 1 on the medieval pig farm. You're already behind schedule, already injured, and already questioning every life choice that led you to this moment. And the pigs? They're just getting started with their demands. The medieval manorial system meant you didn't even own these pigs. You were working them for the lord of the manor, who would take the lion's share of any profit. Your payment might be permission to keep 1 piglet per litter, or maybe a small portion of meat at slaughter time. The math was never in your favor. The system was never designed for you to get ahead. It was designed to keep you exactly where you were, alive enough to keep working, desperate enough to never refuse. As the dawn finally breaks, casting long shadows across the pig enclosure, you allow yourself one brief moment to lean against the fence and catch your breath. One of the piglets, maybe 6 weeks old, eyes bright with the kind of energy you'll never feel again, waddles over and sniffs your foot with innocent curiosity. For just a second, it's almost cute. Then its mother charges over, territorial and aggressive, and you have to jump back to avoid being bitten. Right? No sentimentality. These aren't pets. They're not friends. They're livestock, and you're the expendable labor keeping them alive until market day. And you've got about 8 more hours of work ahead before you can even think about your own meal. Your stomach growls. The pigs at least have eaten. You'll have to wait. The sun is finally creeping over the horizon, and with it comes a revelation that your nose had been trying to tell you in the darkness, but your brain mercifully suppressed. The smell. Oh, the magnificent, all-encompassing, soul-crushing smell of a medieval pig farm in full operation. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Now multiply that by 50. Add in layers of rotting organic matter, the sharp tang of ammonia that makes your eyes water involuntarily, the sweet, sick smell of decomposition, and a base note of animal musk so powerful it feels like a physical presence. Now imagine you can't leave. You can't hold your breath and rush through to fresh air on the other side. This is your office. This is where you'll spend the majority of your waking hours. Welcome to the olfactory nightmare that is medieval pig farm management. The primary culprit is, unsurprisingly, pig waste. And medieval pigs produced a lot of it. A single adult pig can generate anywhere from 8 to 12 pounds of manure daily. You've got dozens of pigs in a relatively confined space, and they're doing what comes naturally, defecating with enthusiastic abandon and absolutely no concern for where it lands. The medieval pig enclosure doesn't have modern drainage systems, rubber mats, or pressure washing equipment. What it has is packed earth that's been saturated with months, sometimes years, of accumulated waste. During dry periods, this waste dries into a crusty layer that you can almost convince yourself isn't that bad, until you step on it and your foot breaks through into the moist, reeking layer beneath. It's like walking on the world's most disgusting creme brulee. During wet periods, which in medieval England meant roughly 70% of the year, the entire enclosure becomes a fetid swamp. We're talking about a slurry of mud, manure, urine, rotting straw, and unidentified organic matter that reaches ankle deep in some areas and occasionally swallows your shoe entirely. The ammonia levels alone would violate every modern workplace safety regulation. Ammonia is produced when urea in urine breaks down, And in a confined space with inadequate ventilation and no waste management system, it accumulates to eye-watering, throat-burning, lung-searing concentrations. You've developed a chronic cough that all the pig workers have. At night, you sometimes taste copper in your mouth. Your eyes are perpetually slightly inflamed. These aren't just discomforts. They're the early warning signs of respiratory damage that medieval people had no way to understand or treat. Historians studying medieval agricultural practices have noted that pig farmers had notably shorter lifespans even compared to other peasants, which is really saying something considering the average medieval peasant life expectancy was already hovering around 35 to 40 years. The constant exposure to ammonia, combined with zoonotic diseases, physical injuries, and general malnutrition, created a perfect storm of health hazards. But here's the thing, you don't know this. Germ theory won't be discovered for another 500 years. You just know that pig work is hard, you're always tired, and people who work with pigs seem to die young. Just one of those mysteries, you figure, as you're wading through the morning muck check, making sure no pigs have gotten stuck, injured, or died overnight. You notice one of the sows has developed what looks like a skin infection. Her hide, normally covered in coarse bristly hair, has a patch that's inflamed and weeping. This is bad news. Pig diseases spread rapidly in close quarters, and you've got no antibiotics, no antiseptics, no real medical knowledge beyond folk remedies that may or may not work. The smell of infected pig is its own special category of terrible. It's a sweetish, rotten odor that cuts through even the baseline stench of the farm. You make a mental note to mention this to the reeve, though you already know what his response will be. Isolate her if she gets worse, and if she dies, at least you can salvage some meat before it spoils completely. Medieval agriculture operated on thin margins. Sentimentality about sick animals was a luxury nobody could afford. But let's talk about the other sources of that all-pervasive stench. There's the slop barrel, which we mentioned earlier, but deserves its own special recognition in the pantheon of awful smells. In summer, fermentation accelerates, and that barrel becomes a bubbling cauldron of decomposition. Flies lay eggs in it. The eggs become maggots. The maggots become flies. The cycle continues with enthusiastic vigor. You've long since stopped being disgusted by the sight of maggots writhing in the pig's food because, honestly, the pigs don't care, and you need to conserve your emotional energy for things that might actually kill you. Then there's the bedding situation. Medieval pigs slept on straw, which needed to be changed regularly. Regularly, in medieval terms, meant whenever someone got around to it, or when the smell became so overpowering that even the pigs seemed uncomfortable. The soiled straw, mixed with manure and urine, was supposed to be removed and composted for use as fertilizer in the fields. In practice, this happened less frequently than it should, meaning the pigs were often lying in damp, rotting plant matter that hosted its own ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, and parasites. You've got your own aromatic contributions to this symphony of stench. You're wearing clothes that haven't been properly washed in weeks. Medieval washing often meant hanging clothes outside to air out, maybe beating them with a stick to dislodge visible dirt, or if you were really ambitious, rinsing them in cold water without soap. Hot water and actual soap were luxuries beyond most peasants' reach. So your tunic has absorbed layers of pig farm odors, would smoke from your home fire, your own body odor. Deodorant won't be invented for many centuries, and probably some stains of biological origin that are best left unexamined. Medieval people weren't oblivious to smell. They had the same olfactory equipment we do, but their tolerance threshold was wildly different from modern sensibilities. Bad smells were just part of life. The theory of miasma, the belief that diseases were caused by bad air or foul odors, actually made medieval people somewhat aware that stench could be connected to health problems. They just had completely wrong ideas about the mechanism and absolutely no effective solutions. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some wealthy medieval people carried small bouquets of herbs or scented pomanders when they had to venture near pig farms or other smelly locations. These nosegays were supposed to ward off disease by counteracting the bad air with good smells. Spoiler alert, they didn't work for disease prevention, but they probably made the olfactory experience marginally less horrific. You, as a pig farmer, don't have access to fancy scented pomanders. Your defense mechanism is simply getting used to it, which your nose accomplishes through a process called olfactory adaptation. Basically, your smell receptors give up after prolonged exposure to the same intense odor. This is why you don't realize just how badly you smell to other people. When you eventually trudge back to the village, other peasants give you a wide berth. Children run away. Even the dogs seem hesitant. You've become a walking biohazard, a human embodiment of the pig farm stench, and you carry it with you like an invisible but extremely noticeable cloud. There's a reason pig farmers often lived on the outskirts of medieval villages. It wasn't just about keeping the pigs away from food storage areas. It was about keeping the pig farmers downwind from everyone else. The clothing situation deserves deeper examination because it contributes significantly to your personal stench profile. That wool tunic? It's excellent at trapping odors. Wool is naturally somewhat water-resistant, which is great for staying dryish in the rain, but terrible for releasing absorbed smells. Every time you sweat, which is constantly because pig farming is physically demanding, that moisture soaks into the wool fibers along with whatever you've been wading through. The wool never fully dries out, creating a perpetually damp garment that's essentially a wearable petri dish. Your leather shoes or foot wrappings are even worse. Leather, when exposed to constant moisture and organic matter, develops a special kind of funk that defies description. It's part rot, part fermentation, part something that seems almost alive in its intensity. You've tried drying them by the fire, but that just seems to bake the smell in more thoroughly. Some days you consider going barefoot, but then you remember the time you saw another farmhand step on a rusty nail in the pig enclosure and subsequently develop an infection that cost him his foot. Tetanus wasn't called tetanus yet, they just called it lockjaw and understood it was usually fatal. You keep the shoes on. Scholars still debate whether medieval people's tolerance for smell indicated a fundamental difference in cleanliness standards or simply reflected the practical realities of limited resources. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Medieval people valued cleanliness conceptually. Religious texts and medical treatises mention the importance of washing, but the practical challenges of heating water, making soap, and having enough clothing to rotate meant that theoretical cleanliness and practical cleanliness were very different things. As the morning progresses and the sun climbs higher, the heat begins to intensify the smells. It's a warm day, maybe late spring or early summer, and the temperature is coaxing new levels of pungency from every surface. The manure pile behind the enclosure, which is supposed to be composting for later use as fertilizer, is practically shimmering with heat waves. Flies are emerging in biblical proportions, creating a low, constant buzzing that adds an auditory component to the sensory assault. You're checking the water troughs now, making sure the pigs have access to relatively clean water. This is actually one of your more pleasant tasks, relatively speaking, because the well is located upwind from the pig enclosure. For a brief few minutes, as you're hauling buckets of water, you can breathe air that doesn't taste like pig farm. It's a small mercy, but you've learned to appreciate small mercies. They're all you're going to get. The water itself is another concern. Medieval people understood that stagnant water was bad, but they didn't understand why. They couldn't see bacteria or parasites. So the water troughs, which are basically hollowed out logs or rough wooden containers, rarely get properly cleaned. They accumulate a layer of green slime, dead insects, and occasionally a drowned mouse. You're supposed to scrub them out periodically, but supposed to and actually happens are different things when you're juggling 17 other tasks simultaneously. The pigs drink from these troughs enthusiastically, often dunking their entire heads in the water and churning it into a muddy, contaminated soup within minutes of you filling it. Some of the pigs like to defecate near the water source, because apparently they've decided that your job isn't hard enough already. You try to position the troughs away from the worst of the muck, but in an enclosure that's essentially 80% muck, your options are limited. Here's another medieval reality that contributes to the stench situation: garbage disposal. The village doesn't have a sanitation department. Organic waste, all organic waste from all sources, typically gets thrown into pits, composted, or fed to pigs. This means the pigs are sometimes eating things that would horrify modern food safety inspectors. Not that the pigs care. They're omnivores with digestive systems that can handle an impressively wide range of organic matter. But it does mean their waste products are breaking down an equally impressive range of consumed materials, creating a complex bouquet of decomposition odors. You're about 3 hours into your day now, and you've already been kicked by a pig, nearly fallen face first into the muck twice, and developed a headache from the ammonia exposure. Your eyes are watering. Your throat feels raw. You've got a mysterious itchy rash on your forearms that might be from contact with pig skin parasites, might be from the straw, or might be from any of the dozen other potential irritants in your environment. You don't know, and there's no dermatologist to consult. You'll probably rub some tallow on it later and hope for the best. The smell has permeated your hair, your skin, probably your soul at this point. You've accepted that this is just what you smell like now. This is your identity. You are the pig farmer, the one who smells like concentrated essence of medieval agriculture. And if that bothers people, well, someone has to do this job. Those fancy nobles up at the manor house eating their roasted pork? They don't want to think about where it comes from or what it takes to raise it. That's your burden to bear, along with the smell, the injuries, and the knowledge that tomorrow will be exactly the same. The sun is climbing higher. The day is far from over, and that baseline stench is not going anywhere. If anything, as the day heats up, it's going to get worse. Much worse. But at least you've stopped noticing it quite as much. Small mercies, remember? You'll take what you can get. The morning slop is gone. The water troughs are filled, and you're surveying your domain with the weary satisfaction of someone who's completed the easy tasks. That's when you hear it, the sound that makes every pig farmer's stomach drop. It's the unmistakable squeal of pigs who've spotted the feed cart approaching for the second meal of the day, and they're already working themselves into a frenzy. Medieval pigs weren't fed on a modern schedule with carefully calibrated nutritional pellets dispensed from automatic feeders. They were fed when you could feed them with whatever was available, and the amount varied wildly based on the season, the success of recent harvests, and whether the Lord's household had been particularly wasteful lately. This inconsistency made the pigs perpetually anxious about food, which translated into aggressive, competitive feeding behavior that would make a Black Friday sale look orderly by comparison. You're approaching the feed storage area, a small outbuilding with a thatched roof that's constantly at war with rats, when you notice the morning scraps have been supplemented with some barley meal. This is unusual and means someone important is visiting the manor, so the kitchen has been producing more waste than normal. The pigs are going to lose their collective minds over this upgrade from standard garbage slop. Here's where we need to talk about pig intelligence, because it's both a blessing and a curse for you. Pigs are smart, genuinely, remarkably intelligent animals, often compared to dogs in their cognitive abilities. They can learn routines, recognize individual humans, remember where food is stored, and absolutely will manipulate situations to their advantage. This means your pigs have figured out several things. 1, that you're the source of food. 2, that if they crowd you aggressively enough, you'll sometimes drop the bucket trying to escape. And 3, that the weakest pig in the group makes an excellent target for bullying, which means more food for everyone else. You're loading the morning's collection into a larger bucket. This one's actually more of a wooden trough you can barely carry, and psychologically preparing yourself for what comes next. The pigs have already congregated at the fence line. They can see you. They can smell the food. and they're making a sound that's somewhere between excitement and rage, a cacophony of grunts, squeals, and snorts that would terrify anyone who's never worked with pigs before. The gate. This is always the critical moment. You need to get through the gate, close it behind you before any pigs escape, because escaped pigs mean hours of chasing them down and possibly punishment from the reeve, and distribute the food while being swarmed by dozens of aggressive, hungry animals who outweigh you and have zero concept of personal space. You unlatch the gate with one hand while balancing the trough with the other. This is a skill that's taken months to develop, and you've got the scars to prove the learning curve was steep. The moment the gate swings open, you're immediately pressed by pig bodies. They're shoving against your legs, trying to get their snouts into the trough before you've even entered. One particularly ambitious sow. You've mentally nicknamed her the Duchess because of her imperious attitude, is already trying to knock the entire container out of your hands. Medieval sources, particularly manorial records, occasionally mention injuries from pig feeding. One account from a 13th century English manor recorded a swineherd who had his finger bitten off during feeding time. Another reference from a monastic chronicle mentions a young boy who was knocked down by pigs and trampled so badly he couldn't work for 3 weeks. These aren't freak accidents. They're occupational hazards that everyone working with pigs understood and accepted as part of the job. You're shuffling forward now, trying to maintain momentum while being literally pushed from all sides. Pigs don't respect your authority. They don't recognize that you're the food provider deserving gratitude. They see you as an obstacle between them and breakfast, or rather, second breakfast, since you already fed them at dawn. The barley meal smell is driving them crazy. The Duchess has escalated from shoving to actively trying to bite the edge of the trough. You kick her away. Not hard enough to injure, just enough to create space, and she squeals indignantly before immediately returning to the assault. You've reached the first feeding trough, one of several rough wooden containers scattered around the enclosure. You're trying to pour the food in an even distribution, but this is nearly impossible when you've got pig heads literally inside the container you're pouring from. You've developed a technique that's part pour, part fling, part prayer. Some of the food lands in the trough, some lands on pig heads, some lands in the mud, where it'll be enthusiastically retrieved later. The noise level is extraordinary. If you thought the pre-feeding anticipation was loud, the actual feeding time is a full-scale riot. Pigs are squealing, grunting, and making aggressive vocalizations at each other. Dominance hierarchies are being enforced with shoulder checks, bites, and the pig equivalent of aggressive shoving. The smaller pigs are being bullied away from the prime feeding spots, and you're supposed to make sure they get some food too, which means you need to physically position yourself between the dominant pigs and the feeding areas for the smaller ones. This is dangerous. You're putting yourself in the middle of a feeding frenzy, and pigs have teeth. They're not long canines like a dog's, but they're sharp enough to tear skin and strong enough to break a finger if you're unlucky enough to get caught. You're constantly doing a risk assessment. Is it worth the injury to make sure that small guilt over there gets enough to eat? The answer should be yes, because she represents future profit for the manor, but in the moment, when the Duchess is actively trying to bite your leg for having the audacity to feed someone else, the calculus gets fuzzy. You've moved to the second trough now, and the pig mob has followed you. This is actually strategic. By moving between feeding locations, you can spread the herd out a bit, reducing the concentration of aggressive energy in any one spot. It's like you're conducting an orchestra, except the instruments are 200-pound animals with attitude problems and the music is chaos. Here's a quirky detail that historians have documented. Medieval pigs were often marked for identification, either through ear notching or sometimes through branding. The marks indicated ownership in a system where pigs were valuable property and theft was a serious concern. You're supposed to be able to identify each pig in your care, know which ones belong to the Lord directly, which ones are being raised as part of peasant obligations, and which ones might be the priest's pig that's boarding here temporarily. In practice, when you're being swarmed by dozens of snorting, moving pig bodies, checking their ear notches is not a priority. You're on your third trough now, and your arms are aching from carrying the feed container. You've been kicked at least twice, once in the shin, once in the thigh, hard enough to leave bruises but not hard enough to actually injure. This is a good feeding session by medieval pig farm standards. Nobody's bleeding yet, including you. But then you notice one of the younger pigs, maybe 4 months old, is limping. This is concerning for multiple reasons. First, an injured pig is a financial loss if it can't be treated. Second, in the close quarters of the enclosure, injuries can become infected rapidly. Third, and most immediately relevant, the other pigs have noticed the weakness. Pigs, for all their intelligence and personality, can be absolutely brutal to members of their group who show vulnerability. You watch as 2 of the larger pigs actively push the limping youngster away from the food. When it tries to circle around to a different trough, they follow and block it again. This isn't casual, this is deliberate exclusion from the feeding, and if it continues, the young pig will starve even in the midst of plenty. You need to intervene, which means putting yourself between aggressive feeding pigs and their target. You position yourself near the limping pig and physically block the bullies. One of them, a massive hog who's probably destined for slaughter in the next few months, doesn't appreciate your interference. He swings his head toward your leg, not quite a bite, but definitely a warning. You've got a stick for exactly this purpose, and you rap him on the snout. Not hard enough to injure, but firm enough to communicate that you're serious. He backs off, snorting indignantly, and returns to one of the other feeding areas. The young pig takes advantage of the protection and starts eating frantically, like it knows this opportunity won't last. You're standing guard, one eye on the feeding pig, one eye on the rest of the herd, constantly scanning for the next threat. This is exhausting. This is every feeding time. You're not just distributing food, you're managing social dynamics, preventing violence, trying to keep the peace among animals whose natural inclination is toward aggression when resources are involved. Scholars debate whether medieval pig farmers developed any sophisticated understanding of pig behavior or if they simply reacted to situations as they arose. The truth is probably that experienced swineherds developed practical, intuitive knowledge about pig psychology without having formal scientific framework for it. You understand, through painful experience, that pigs have dominance hierarchies, that they're food motivated to the point of violence, and that intervening in their social structures is sometimes necessary but always risky. You're down to the last bit of food now, and you're trying to make it stretch to reach the pigs at the periphery who've been too timid or too low in the pecking order to fight for access to the main troughs. You're literally hand-feeding some of them, which means getting your fingers dangerously close to pig mouths. Pigs don't have great depth perception, and in their feeding excitement, they don't carefully distinguish between food and the hand delivering it. There it goes, a sharp pain in your index finger as one of the younger pigs accidentally, you hope it's accidental, catches your fingertip while grabbing for the food. The skin isn't broken, but it's going to bruise. You've still got all 10 fingers, which puts you ahead of some of the older pig farmers in the village, but you've accumulated enough near misses that you know it's only a matter of time before a feeding incident costs you something more permanent. The bucket is empty. The feeding frenzy is subsiding into a more general atmosphere of contentment. Pigs are grunting happily, rooting through the mud for any dropped scraps, and generally settling into the post-meal stupor that represents the closest thing to peace you'll experience with them today. You're backing toward the gate, still watching the herd, because turning your back on pigs immediately after feeding is asking to be knocked down by one who thinks you might have hidden food in your pockets. You make it through the gate and latch it securely. Your legs are shaking slightly, partly from exertion, partly from adrenaline. You've survived another feeding time with all your fingers attached. The day is maybe 1/3 over. Your hands are covered in mud, pig saliva, and various substances you'd rather not identify. Medieval people didn't have antibacterial soap or hand sanitizer. You might rinse them in cold water from the well, but more likely you'll just wipe them on your already filthy tunic and move on to the next task. Hygiene is a luxury you can't afford when there are 17 more hours of work ahead. As you're walking away from the enclosure, you hear a squeal. Not a feeding frenzy squeal, but a pain squeal. You turn back and see that the limping pig you protected during feeding is now being actively attacked by two others. They're biting at its flanks, driving it into a corner. This is the pig equivalent of bullying that's crossed from social enforcement into actual violence. You're going to have to go back in there. You're going to have to break up the fight, possibly isolate the injured pig, and definitely add figure out what's wrong with its leg to your growing list of problems. The gate latch feels heavier the second time you lift it. Welcome to feeding time on the medieval pig farm, where every meal is an adventure in livestock management. Every day tests your reflexes, and keeping all 10 fingers is an achievement worth celebrating. You've barely caught your breath from the feeding frenzy when reality delivers its next delightful task: mucking out the pigsties. If feeding time was a test of your reflexes and survival instincts, waste management is a test of your willpower, your back strength, and your ability to suppress the part of your brain that screams, "This is absolutely disgusting," every 5 seconds. The tools of your trade are almost comically inadequate for the job. You've got a wooden shovel, not the efficient, lightweight aluminum or plastic shovels of the modern world, but a thick, heavy implement carved from a single piece of wood, probably oak or ash. The blade is broad and slightly cupped, designed to scoop up semi-solid matter. It's also getting worn down from constant use, developing splinters that you'll eventually lodge in your palms, and the edge is losing its definition, making it progressively worse at its job. Metal shovels exist, but they're expensive and reserved for more important uses. You get wood. You're also carrying a wicker basket, woven from willow branches, that's stained with substances that have long since become part of its fiber structure. This basket is your transport vehicle for the manure you're about to collect. It's got handles, which is nice, but it's also got gaps in the weave, which means liquid components of your cargo tend to drip through onto your legs and feet during transport. You've stopped noticing. That's probably a bad sign. The medieval approach to manure management was theoretically sophisticated. Manure was valuable as fertilizer, and the three-field system that dominated European agriculture absolutely depended on regular applications of organic matter to maintain soil fertility. In practice, the gap between theory and execution was about as wide as the gap between your wooden shovel and a modern front loader. You're starting in the main sleeping area, where the pigs have been bedded down on straw that was fresh maybe 2 weeks ago but is now compressed, damp, and permeated with urine and feces. The overnight accumulation is your immediate target. Pigs, despite their reputation for filth, actually prefer to defecate away from where they sleep, if given enough space. The problem is they haven't been given enough space. The enclosure is packed tight with animals, so their away from the sleeping area is about 3 feet away, which means everything is essentially one big contaminated zone. You position yourself at the edge of the worst concentration of waste and drive the shovel blade into the muck. The resistance is significant. This isn't loose, dry material. It's a dense, compacted mixture of manure, urine-soaked straw, mud, and time. You lever the shovel using your whole body weight and finally manage to lift a shovelful of what can only be described as medieval biological concrete. The smell, which you thought you'd adapted to, achieves a new dimension when you're actively disturbing the waste. Fresh air has not penetrated these lower layers, meaning you're releasing concentrated pockets of decomposition gases that have been trapped under the upper crust. Your eyes water immediately. You actually gag, which is embarrassing because you've been doing this job for years and thought you were beyond gagging. The body, apparently, never fully surrenders its survival instincts about avoiding putrid matter. You dump the shovelful into the basket and go back for another, and another, and another. The work is repetitive, backbreaking, and relentless. Medieval labor was characterized by this kind of endless physical repetition. There were no machines to reduce the workload, no clever efficiency hacks, just human muscle power applied to an enormous task, one shovelful at a time. Your back is already protesting. You've been awake for maybe 6 hours, and you've already fed the pigs twice, hauled water, intervened in several aggressive encounters, and now you're bent over at an awkward angle, repeatedly lifting loads that weigh 15 to 20 pounds each. The biomechanics are terrible. Your spine is compressed with each lift. Your lower back muscles are screaming. You'll feel this tomorrow and the day after, and every day for the rest of your life, because cumulative strain doesn't heal when you're doing the same damaging motions day after day after day. Here's a historical reality that doesn't make it into the romantic medieval farm paintings. Chronic pain was universal among working peasants. Everyone over the age of 20 had joint problems, back problems, repetitive strain injuries that modern medicine would recognize as serious orthopedic issues. There was no physical therapy, no pain management beyond maybe some willow bark tea, which actually does contain salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, though medieval people didn't know why it worked, and certainly no concept of ergonomic tool design or workplace injury prevention. You filled the basket, which now weighs probably 60 pounds. You lift it using your legs because you learned the hard way that lifting with your back leads to spasms that can leave you unable to work for days, and unable to work means unable to eat, and begin the journey to the manure pile. The manure pile, or midden heap as it's sometimes called, is located about 50 yards from the pig enclosure. This is supposedly far enough to prevent contamination of the main work areas while being close enough to be practical. In reality, during rain, which is frequent in medieval England, runoff from the manure pile flows everywhere, creating channels of contaminated liquid that make the whole area a biological hazard zone. You're walking carefully, trying not to trip on the uneven ground, while liquid pig waste drips through the basket weave onto your legs. Your shoes are making squelching sounds. You've given up trying to keep any part of yourself clean. Clean is a theoretical concept, like justice or fair wages, that doesn't exist in your actual lived experience. The manure pile is a monument to agricultural necessity and human suffering. It's probably 8 feet tall, 20 feet wide, and actively decomposing. Steam rises from its surface on cold mornings because the biological breakdown of organic matter generates heat. It's home to an impressive ecosystem of flies, beetles, worms, and other decomposers. Rats nest in it, which is a problem because rats eat stored grain and spread diseases, but also kind of helpful because they're part of the breakdown process. Nature's recyclers, hard at work in the world's most disgusting office. You heave your basket load onto the pile, and the impact sends up a cloud of particles that you absolutely don't want to think about too carefully. Some of it lands on you. You've stopped caring. This is your life now. You are one with the manure. The manure is one with you. Philosophical acceptance is the only psychological defense mechanism available. Back to the enclosure for another load. And another. And another. Historians studying medieval agricultural labor have estimated that mucking out a moderate-sized pig operation could take anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on how long it had been since the last cleaning. You're on hour 2, and you've made a visible dent in the accumulation, but there's still so much more to go. The pigs are watching you work with what appears to be mild interest mixed with contempt. Several of them are currently defecating in areas you've just cleaned, because why wouldn't they? They have no concept of helping you out. They're just living their best pig lives, which includes depositing waste wherever convenient. One of the older sows has positioned herself directly in your path, lying down in a spot you need to clean. You try to shoo her away, but she's decided this is her spot, and she's not moving. This is a battle of wills you're going to lose because she outweighs you and has nothing but time. You work around her, which means awkward angles and extra strain on your back as you twist to reach the contaminated straw trapped under her bulk. Here's something scholars still debate about medieval agriculture: the exact composition and management of manure piles. Some argue that medieval farmers had sophisticated understanding of composting and deliberately managed their midden heaps to produce optimal fertilizer. Others argue that manure piles were just places to dump waste, and any composting that happened was accidental. The truth is probably that knowledge varied widely. Some experienced farmers understood that turning the pile, maintaining moisture levels, and allowing time for decomposition produced better fertilizer, while others just piled it up and hoped for the best. You're in the latter category, mostly because you don't have time for sophisticated manure management. You've got 17 other tasks screaming for attention. The manure pile gets what it gets, which is unsorted waste dumped in a heap. If it turns into good fertilizer, great. If it doesn't, well, that's a problem for planting season, which is someone else's concern. You're just trying to survive today. Your hands are developing blisters. The wooden shovel handle, despite being worn smooth from years of use, still creates friction against your palms. You've got calluses on your calluses, but there are only so many layers of dead skin your body can build up before the live tissue underneath starts to protest. You feel a hot spot forming on your right palm, the precursor to a blister. You ignore it. Stopping to tend to minor injuries is a luxury you can't afford. The sun is climbing higher, and the temperature is rising. This is making everything worse. The smells are intensifying with the heat. Your physical exertion is making you sweat, which is soaking through your tunic, adding another layer to your personal odor profile. You're thirsty, but the water bucket is all the way over by the well, and stopping to drink means losing momentum, and losing momentum means you'll never finish this task. You've been working for maybe 3 hours now, and you've cleared roughly half of the main sleeping area. Your back feels like someone has driven a spike through your lower spine. Your shoulders are burning. Your hands are cramping around the shovel handle. This is the reality of medieval labor. It's not romantic. It's not character building in any meaningful sense. It's just hard, painful, repetitive work that grinds you down day after day until your body gives out. There's a moment you're bent over, shovel in hand, surrounded by pig waste, where you have what might be called an existential crisis. Is this really your life? Is this all there is? You wake up in the dark, you work until you can barely stand, you fall asleep in exhausted misery, and then you do it all again tomorrow? There's no vacation time, no retirement plan, no light at the end of the tunnel except maybe, if you're lucky, you'll survive long enough to be too old and broken to work, at which point you'll depend on your children's charity until you die. But the moment passes because the pigs are fighting again, and one of them has gotten tangled in the fence, and there's fresh manure appearing in spots you've already cleaned, and the reeve is probably going to come by later to inspect your work and find something to criticize because that's his job, and you've still got hours of this ahead of you before you can even think about your own minimal needs. You drive the shovel into another pile of waste. Lift, walk, dump, return, repeat. This is medieval pig farming. This is your inheritance, your present, and your future. The waste is endless. The work is endless. And tomorrow it all starts over again. Your wooden shovel is starting to develop a crack near the handle. You'll need to repair it soon, which means finding time you don't have and materials you can barely afford. But that's a problem for future you. Present you just needs to finish mucking out this enclosure before the day gets any hotter and the smell gets any worse. One more basket, then another, then another. The pile grows. Your spirit diminishes. Welcome to medieval waste management, where the only constant is that there's always more shit to shovel. You're wiping sweat from your forehead with a hand that's covered in substances you're actively trying not to think about when you notice it. One of the younger pigs is acting strange. Not aggressive strange or hungry strange, but lethargic strange. It's lying in the corner of the enclosure, breathing rapidly, its sides heaving with effort. Its eyes have a glazed quality that you've learned to recognize as bad news. Welcome to the terrifying world of medieval veterinary medicine, where your diagnostic tools consist of looking at the animal and hoping you can figure out what's wrong before it dies and takes half the herd with it. There's no thermometer to check for fever, no blood tests to identify infections, no x-rays to reveal internal problems. You've got your eyes, your experience, and a collection of folk remedies that range from might actually help to completely useless, but at least you're trying. You approach the sick pig carefully. Even ill pigs can be unpredictable, and a frightened animal in pain might lash out. You're speaking in low, soothing tones, not because you think the pig understands English, but because tone matters, and keeping yourself calm helps keep the situation from escalating. The pig doesn't move much as you get closer, which is concerning in itself. Healthy pigs are constantly in motion, rooting, exploring, interacting with their environment. The stillness is wrong. You're running through the mental checklist that years of experience have built. Is it eating? You glance at the feeding areas and notice this pig spot is still relatively full of food. A pig that's not interested in eating is a pig with serious problems. Is it drinking? Hard to tell, but the water near where it's lying seems undisturbed. Is there discharge from its nose or eyes? You lean closer, ignoring the smell, which is saying something given your current environment, and see yellowish mucus around its nostrils. Respiratory infection. Probably. Maybe. You're not a veterinarian. Those don't really exist as a professional category in medieval Europe. There are farriers who work with horses, and there's general animal husbandry knowledge passed down through generations, but pigs? Pigs are somewhat expendable livestock, so they get less specialized attention than valuable war horses or breeding cattle. Medieval people understood that sick animals needed to be isolated from healthy ones. They couldn't see germs or understand disease transmission mechanisms, but they'd observed enough outbreaks to know that sickness spread. The theory of corrupted air or miasma was the prevailing explanation. Bad smells and foul air caused disease to jump from animal to animal. They were wrong about the mechanism but accidentally right about the conclusion. Separate the sick one. You need to move this pig to an isolation area, which is a small pen about 20 yards away that's reserved for exactly this purpose. The problem is, the pig probably weighs 120 pounds and doesn't want to be moved. You can't just pick it up. Medieval people were generally smaller and lighter than modern humans due to chronic malnutrition, and you're no exception. You're maybe 5 feet 6 inches and 140 pounds of lean muscle and grinding poverty. That pig is almost your weight and has 4 legs to your 2. You're going to need help, which means fetching Thomas, another pig worker who's currently supposed to be repairing fence on the other side of the manor grounds. You leave the sick pig and jog toward where Thomas should be, your legs protesting the sudden change from hours of repetitive shoveling to actual running. Your body isn't designed for multiple types of physical exertion in the same day. Your body is designed to collapse into a heap and sleep for 14 hours, but that's not happening anytime soon. Thomas is indeed working on the fence, and he's not happy about being pulled away from his task. The reeve has been on him about finishing it, and now you're asking him to help with a sick pig, which is going to make both of you behind on your assigned duties. This is the medieval work dilemma. Every task is important, every task is urgent, and there are never enough hours or people to accomplish everything. You're constantly triaging crises. Together, you return to the sick pig. Thomas takes one look and grimaces. The coughing sickness, he says, using the colloquial term for what might be pneumonia, might be swine flu, might be any number of respiratory infections that swept through pig populations with depressing regularity. Historians have documented numerous livestock disease outbreaks in medieval records. Manorial accounts mention losses from murrain, a catch-all term for livestock disease, that sometimes wiped out significant portions of herds. You and Thomas fashion a rough stretcher from a piece of old burlap and 2 poles. The plan is to roll the pig onto the fabric and carry it between you. The execution is messier. The pig, despite being lethargic, doesn't appreciate being manhandled. It squeals, thrashes weakly, and manages to bite Thomas's hand before you finally get it secured. Thomas curses, actual medieval profanity which is creative and largely focused on religious blasphemy, and you get the pig lifted. The journey to the isolation pen is awkward and exhausting. The pig is heavy, the stretcher is barely functional, and you're walking across uneven ground while trying not to trip. Your arms are shaking from the combined exertion of shoveling manure all morning and now carrying a sick pig. Thomas is breathing hard, his face red with effort. You're both aware that if you drop this pig, the fall might injure it further, and injured pigs are even more expensive losses than sick pigs. You make it to the isolation pen and lower the pig as gently as possible onto fresh straw. The pig immediately curls up and goes still again, its breathing rapid and shallow. You and Thomas stand there for a moment, catching your breath, and then comes the question neither of you wants to address. What now? The treatment options are limited and largely ineffective. There's a folk remedy that involves mixing garlic and herbs into the pig's food, based on the theory that strong-smelling substances counteract the bad air causing illness. You've seen this work exactly never, but you've also seen pigs recover on their own, so who's to say whether the garlic helped or the pig just had a mild case? There's another approach that involves bloodletting, making a small cut to release corrupted blood. But that's usually reserved for valuable horses and humans who can afford physicians, not pigs. What you actually do is the medieval equivalent of supportive care. Fresh water, easily digestible food if the pig will eat, clean bedding, and isolation from the herd. And prayer. Medieval people prayed about everything, including sick livestock, because when you have no effective medical interventions, appealing to divine assistance is psychologically comforting even if it's therapeutically useless. Thomas heads back to his fence repair, leaving you alone with the sick pig. You refresh its water, scatter some chopped vegetables and grain mash nearby in case it gets hungry, and make a mental note to check on it every few hours. You're also now worried about the rest of the herd. If one pig has a respiratory infection, others might be incubating it. You need to watch for symptoms: coughing, nasal discharge, lethargy, loss of appetite. Back at the main enclosure, you're scrutinizing the other pigs with new paranoia. Is that one coughing or just snorting normally? Does that one look sluggish, or is it just satisfied after eating? Pig health assessment is as much art as science, and you're working with incomplete information and no formal training. You're trying to spot potentially fatal illnesses before they become herd-wide catastrophes, armed with nothing but observation skills and growing anxiety. Here's a cheerful medieval fact. Zoonotic diseases, illnesses that jump from animals to humans, were common and poorly understood. People who worked closely with livestock regularly contracted diseases from them. There was no concept of protective equipment, hand washing after handling animals, or any of the biosecurity measures that modern farms employ. You've just spent an hour in close physical contact with a pig that's sick with something respiratory, and now your own throat is feeling a bit scratchy. Is it sympathetic anxiety? Early infection? Impossible to know. The fear of disease was constant in medieval life. Plague outbreaks got the historical attention, but everyday illnesses killed plenty of people too. A respiratory infection that a modern person would treat with antibiotics and recover from in a week could kill a malnourished, overworked medieval peasant. And you're both malnourished and overworked, which puts you in the high-risk category. You're checking another pig now. This one has what looks like mange, a skin condition caused by mites. Its hide is patchy, with areas of hair loss and visible irritation. The pig is rubbing against fence posts constantly, trying to relieve the itching. Mange is contagious, spreads through physical contact, and makes pigs miserable. The treatment involves sulfur compounds if you can get them, or sometimes just coating the affected areas with tar or grease to suffocate the mites. You've got some leftover tallow that might work. You catch the mangy pig. Easier said than done, even with one that's not feeling well, and begin smearing tallow onto the affected areas. The pig hates this and struggles, managing to smear tallow all over you in the process. Now you smell like pig waste, and rancid animal fat. It's an olfactory symphony that would make people run away screaming. You've stopped noticing. While you're treating the mange, you discover something else. Lice. The pig's skin is crawling with them, tiny parasites that you can actually see moving. External parasites were a constant problem in medieval livestock management. There were no effective insecticides, no antiparasitic medications, just physical removal attempts and folk remedies. You've heard that bathing pigs in a mixture of water and wood ash sometimes helps, but organizing a pig bath is several hours of work you don't have time for today. You're adding organized pig parasite treatment to your mental list of tasks that need doing soon, but probably won't get done because there are 17 other urgent things demanding attention. This is medieval farm management. A constant state of being overwhelmed, falling behind, and doing triage between competing crises. Another pig has caught your attention. This one is limping more pronounced than the one from this morning. You examine its foot and find the problem. A cut, probably from stepping on something sharp, that's become infected. The area around the cut is swollen, hot to the touch, and weeping pus. Without antibiotics, this infection could spread, potentially causing systemic sepsis that kills the pig. Your treatment options are medieval and brutal. Clean the wound as best you can with water, maybe apply some honey if the manor kitchen has any to spare. Honey actually does have antibacterial properties, though medieval people didn't know why, and hope the pig's immune system can fight off the infection. If the infection gets worse, amputation might be necessary. And yes, medieval people did perform amputations on livestock when limbs became gangrenous. The survival rate was not impressive. You're cleaning the wound with water from the trough, which has probably contaminated itself, but better than nothing. The pig is not enjoying this attention and keeps trying to pull its foot away. You're getting kicked repeatedly. Your shins are going to be one continuous bruise. Medieval medical care, whether for humans or animals, often involved physically restraining the patient and just powering through their resistance. The day is progressing, and you've now identified one pig with respiratory infection in isolation, one with mange and lice, one with an infected foot wound, and the ongoing situation with the pig being bullied during feeding times. Oh, and remember that who looked like she might go into labor? She's still pregnant and still looking uncomfortable, which means you need to keep checking on her because pig births can go wrong in numerous horrifying ways. Medieval Pharaoh pig birth had high mortality rates for both mothers and piglets. Complications like breech births, stuck piglets, or postpartum infections killed sows regularly. Piglets could be crushed by their mothers, could be born too weak to nurse, or could succumb to cold, infections, or any number of other problems. Your job includes playing midwife to pigs, which is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. You check on the pregnant sow. She's restless, walking in circles, lying down and standing up repeatedly. These are signs labor might be starting. You've assisted with pig births before, and they're intense, messy, and sometimes require you to physically intervene. Reaching into the birth canal to reposition stuck piglets, which is traumatic for everyone involved and has resulted in more than one swineherd losing fingers to panicked sow bites. You're praying this birth goes normally without complications because you're already stretched thin managing the sick pig, the injured pig, the parasitic pig, and all the normal daily care for the rest of the herd. One more crisis might genuinely break you. The pregnant sow lies down heavily, and you see contractions beginning. This is happening now, right now. You're about to witness the miracle of birth, medieval style, which is less miracle and more biological crisis that hopefully resolves favorably. You settle in next to the pen, watching carefully, ready to intervene if needed but hoping nature will handle this one on its own. Your hands are shaking slightly, partly exhaustion, partly adrenaline, partly the knowledge that the next few hours could end with dead piglets, a dead sow, or if you're very lucky, a successful delivery that adds to the herd's population and the manor's wealth. The sun is past its peak now. You've been working for about 10 hours. Your body is screaming for rest. But the pigs don't care about your exhaustion. They just keep getting sick, getting injured, and getting born. And you just keep trying to keep them alive, one crisis at a time. The piglets are born, 8 squirming, squealing bundles that somehow all survive the birthing process. You've spent the last 3 hours monitoring the delivery, intervening once to help extract a particularly large piglet that was stuck. And now you're exhausted, covered in birth fluids, and acutely aware that your work has barely paused for this miracle of life. The sow is resting, the piglets are nursing, and you need to get back to the 100 other tasks that have been piling up while you played midwife. But first, you need to face an uncomfortable reality about your place in the medieval social hierarchy. You rank somewhere below the pigs in terms of social importance and somewhere above the rats. Maybe. It's debatable. Let's talk about what it means to be a pig farmer in the intricate and absolutely brutal caste system of medieval feudal society. At the top, you've got the nobility, the lord who owns this manor, his family, and their various hangers-on. They live in the stone manor house, eat meat regularly, wear clothes that don't have visible holes, and have opinions about things like politics and theology. Then you've got the clergy, who occupy a parallel hierarchy of spiritual authority. Below them are the knights and minor nobility, then the wealthy merchants and skilled craftsmen, then the regular peasants who farm grain and vegetables. And then, several rungs below that, you've got you, the pig farmer, the swineherd, the person who spends their days covered in pig excrement, smelling like death's unwashed laundry, and performing labor so disgusting that even other peasants look down on you. The social stigma of pig work was real and well documented in medieval sources. Pigs were associated with filth, sin, and base nature. They ate garbage, wallowed in mud, and were often depicted in religious art as symbols of gluttony and moral corruption. By extension, people who worked with pigs were viewed as contaminated by that association. You weren't just poor, you were the wrong kind of poor, the kind that polite society preferred to pretend didn't exist until they wanted their bacon. You're walking back toward the village center. You need to inform the reeve about the new piglets because every birth needs to be recorded for tax purposes, and you're very aware of how people react to your presence. The baker's wife sees you coming and literally crosses to the other side of the path. Not because she's being deliberately cruel, but because your smell is that overpowering and your appearance is that off-putting. You're wearing clothes that are stiff with dried pig waste, your hands and forearms are stained brown with substances that might never wash out, and your hair, you can't remember the last time you properly washed your hair, is greasy and matted. A group of children playing in the road stop their game to stare at you. One of them, maybe 5 years old, points and says loudly, "Mama, why does that man smell like that?" The mother hushes the child quickly, but not before you see the look of disgust on her face. You're used to it. This is your daily experience. You're the village pariah, the person who makes everyone else feel better about their own miserable circumstances because at least they're not you. The reeve's house is at the edge of the village square, a slightly larger cottage that reflects his moderately higher status as the Lord's administrator and enforcer. You knock on the door with your knuckles, not your palm, because your hands are too filthy to touch anything unnecessarily. And wait. The reeve, a stocky man named William who has the perpetual expression of someone who's just discovered mold in his bread, opens the door and immediately wrinkles his nose. "What?" he demands, not bothering with pleasantries. Social niceties are for people with social standing. You don't qualify. You report the pig birth, the number of piglets, and the health status of the sow. William makes notes on a wax tablet he keeps for exactly these purposes. Medieval record-keeping was surprisingly detailed. Manorial lords needed to track their assets, and livestock represented significant wealth. Every pig, every piglet, every death and birth was recorded and would eventually be transferred to parchment rolls that the lord's clerks maintained. "The sick one still alive?" William asks, referring to the respiratory infection case you isolated this morning. "Still alive," you confirm, though you don't add that you're not optimistic about its chances. William nods curtly. "Lord's expecting 12 slaughter-ready pigs by winter. We're behind count." This is directed at you like it's your personal failure that the pig population isn't growing fast enough. Never mind that you're working with the resources you're given and disease and accidents happen. William's job is to extract maximum productivity from the manor's resources, including you, and your job is to absorb blame when productivity falls short. "I'll do what I can," you say, which is the only acceptable response. Arguing with the reeve is pointless and potentially dangerous. He has the Lord's authority to punish insubordination with fines, reduced rations, or physical beatings. You're replaceable. The pigs are valuable. The hierarchy is clear. As you're leaving, William adds, "You're needed at the manor house tomorrow morning. Kitchen waste collection." This means an extra early start, hauling barrels of garbage before beginning your regular pig duties. It's not a request. You nod acknowledgement and leave. Walking back through the village, you pass the church. Father Benedict is outside, tending to the small garden that provides herbs for the parish. He sees you and offers a tight nod of acknowledgement, not quite friendly, but less overtly hostile than most people's reactions. The church preached that all labor was dignified in God's eyes, and that the lowliest worker was valuable in the divine plan. In practice, even priests struggled to fully embrace the spiritual equality of someone who smelled like you. You've heard sermons about how suffering in this life earns rewards in the next, how patient endurance of hardship is virtuous, how the poor and downtrodden are blessed in God's kingdom. It's psychologically comforting theology when you have no material comfort to rely on. Whether you actually believe it or you're just going through the motions because religious nonconformity is dangerous is something you don't examine too closely. Doubt is a luxury, like clean clothes and adequate food. Back at the pig enclosure, you find that your brief absence has created new problems. The dominant boar has gotten into a fight with one of the younger males, and both have fresh wounds. Territory and breeding rights are serious business in pig society, and medieval pigs settled these disputes with violence. The younger male has a torn ear that's bleeding impressively. The boar has bite marks on his shoulder. Neither seems particularly bothered, but you need to assess whether these wounds will become infected like the foot injury you treated earlier. Here's where the social dynamics get particularly complex. You're responsible for these pigs' welfare, but you have no real authority and limited resources. If you decide a pig needs treatment that requires expensive materials, honey, wine for washing wounds, herbs from the apothecary, you need approval from the reeve, who needs to justify the expense to the Lord's household accountant. Every decision is filtered through layers of authority that view you as fundamentally untrustworthy and your judgment as suspect. There's a reason for this distrust, rooted in the class anxieties of feudal society. Peasants, especially those working with valuable livestock, had opportunities for theft. You could claim a pig died when it actually wandered off, and you sold it to a dishonest merchant. You could undercount piglets and keep extras for yourself. You could slaughter a pig accidentally and feed your starving family. These weren't hypothetical concerns, they happened. Medieval court records document numerous cases of livestock theft by the people responsible for managing them. So you're watched. The reeve makes surprise inspections. Piglet counts are verified independently. Dead animals are examined to confirm they actually died rather than being secretly sold. You live under constant suspicion, And this surveillance is just another weight you carry along with the physical labor and social stigma. You're treating the torn ear with water and trying to determine if it needs more intervention when you hear laughter from the direction of the manor house. Looking up, you see a group of noble children, the Lord's grandchildren, visiting from another estate, playing some kind of game on the lawn. They're clean, well-dressed, and carefree in a way that seems alien to you. One of them, a girl maybe 10 years old, points toward the pig enclosure and says something that makes the others laugh. They're laughing at you or at the pigs or at the whole squalid scene. From their perspective, you and the pigs are equally dirty, equally crude, equally part of the unfortunate necessities of rural life that they'll forget about as soon as they return to their more refined surroundings. This moment crystallizes something about medieval social hierarchy. It's not just economic, it's existential. Those children will never be you. They'll never spend a day doing your labor, never understand your exhaustion, never face your choices. They inhabit a completely different reality, and the gulf between their world and yours is so vast it might as well be unbridgeable. Some historians argue that medieval peasants internalized these class distinctions, accepting their subordinate status as natural and divinely ordained. Others argue that resentment simmered constantly, occasionally erupting in revolts and uprisings when conditions became truly unbearable. You're probably somewhere in the middle, too exhausted and hungry to maintain constant revolutionary fervor, but also harboring a quiet, bitter awareness that the system is fundamentally unfair and there's nothing you can do about it. The rest of the afternoon is spent on maintenance tasks that don't seem important until they're not done and everything falls apart. You're repairing fence sections that pigs have damaged, using scavenged wood and leather strips because new materials require authorization you won't get. You're redistributing straw bedding to dry areas, because wet bedding promotes hoof rot and respiratory infections. You're checking the water supply system, really just a series of troughs fed by buckets you haul from the well, to ensure every pig has access to drinking water. These unglamorous tasks are the backbone of pig farming, and they're endless. There's always another fence board loose, another trough that needs scrubbing, another problem emerging from the chaos of managing dozens of semi-feral animals in inadequate facilities with insufficient resources. Around mid-afternoon, you're joined briefly by another village peasant named John who owes labor service to the manor and has been assigned to help with pig work for the day. John normally works in the grain fields, and his discomfort with pig duty is obvious. He's trying not to breathe through his nose, and every time he has to touch something contaminated, he winces visibly. "How do you stand it?" he asks after about an hour of reluctantly assisting you. You shrug. You get used to it. This is only partially true. You never fully get used to it, you just develop coping mechanisms and lower your standards for what constitutes acceptable conditions. John completes his required hours and leaves as quickly as possible, probably to scrub himself with cold water and pray he doesn't smell like pig farm at supper. You watch him go with a mixture of envy and resignation. He gets to leave. This is just a temporary, unpleasant duty for him. For you, it's your entire life. The sun is lowering toward the horizon now, and you're finally approaching the end of your workday. You check on the isolated sick pig. Still alive, still breathing poorly, no better but no worse, and the new piglets, all nursing successfully, which is a small victory. The mangy pig's skin looks slightly less irritated, suggesting the tallow treatment might be helping. The injured foot looks about the same, which means it's not getting worse, which counts as good news. You're exhausted beyond exhaustion, operating on fumes and sheer stubborn persistence. Your back is a landscape of pain. Your hands are raw. Your legs are covered in bruises. You smell like something that died and was subsequently used as a toilet. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. Because you're the pig farmer, the lowest of the low. The person nobody wants to be, but somebody has to be because medieval society needs pork and someone has to manage the disgusting process of producing it. As you finally leave the enclosure for the night, Latching the gate behind you, you allow yourself one brief moment of dark humor. At least the pigs don't judge you. They don't care about your social status or your smell or your exhaustion. They just care about food, water, and shelter, and you provide those things. In that limited sense, you have a purpose. It's not much, but it's something. And some days, that's enough to keep going. The calendar, if you had access to such a luxury or could even read one, has crept into late autumn. The leaves are turning. The air carries a bite of coming winter, and you're aware of a date approaching that fills every pig farmer with a complex mixture of dread, relief, and exhausted anticipation. Slaughter Day. Medieval pig slaughter typically happened in late fall, after pigs had spent autumn foraging for acorns and nuts in the forest, fattening themselves for the knife. The timing was strategic. Cold weather meant meat could be preserved more easily, and reducing the livestock population before winter meant fewer mouths to feed when fodder was scarce and expensive. It was economically necessary and brutally efficient, and you're about to be intimately involved in every grim detail. The night before slaughter day, you barely sleep. This isn't unusual, you rarely sleep well, but tonight your mind won't stop cataloging which pigs are likely to be selected, how the day will unfold, and all the ways things could go wrong. Slaughter day is dangerous. Pigs sense something is wrong, they panic, and panicked pigs can kill people. Every year, stories circulate about slaughters gone wrong. A pig breaking loose and goring someone with its tusks. A poorly secured animal thrashing and breaking a worker's arm. Blood loss from a careless knife slip. You're up before dawn again, but today you're not alone. The slaughter team is gathering, yourself, Thomas, 2 other farmhands, the manor's butcher, an actual skilled craftsman who ranks significantly above you socially, and several strong young men recruited from the village for the heavy labor. There's also a cart for transporting carcasses, several large wooden tubs for blood collection, barrels for intestines and organs, and an array of knives, cleavers, and other implements that look like medieval torture devices, which, from the pig's perspective, they essentially are. The butcher, a gruff man named Robert who has forearms like tree trunks and hands that permanently smell like raw meat, is directing the setup. He's done this dozens of times, and his confident authority is both reassuring and unsettling. He knows exactly how this day will unfold, which means he also knows exactly how much blood you'll all be covered in by sunset. The first pig selected is one of the larger boars, probably 250 pounds, fully grown, aggressive, and absolutely not interested in being led anywhere. Medieval pigs weren't docile animals that could be guided with a gentle hand on the halter. They were semi-feral, smart enough to know something was wrong, and strong enough to resist effectively. You and Thomas and 2 others are tasked with moving the boar from the enclosure to the slaughter area, which is about 30 yards away. The technique involves a combination of pushing, pulling, waving sticks, and desperately trying to channel the pig's movement in the right direction while avoiding getting bitten or trampled. It's like trying to steer a furious, 250-pound boulder that has teeth and a terrible attitude. The boar is squealing. Not the normal pig sounds you're used to, but high-pitched, panic screams that make your skin crawl. Pigs are intelligent enough to understand danger, and this one knows something bad is happening. Its eyes are rolling, showing white, and it's thrashing against the pressure of multiple humans trying to control its movement. After about 15 minutes of struggle that leaves everyone sweating and the boar even more agitated, you finally get it to the slaughter area. This is where Robert takes over with the practiced efficiency of a professional. There's no gentle sedation, no humane stunning equipment. Medieval slaughter was direct and brutal. The pig is forced down, which requires multiple strong people literally wrestling it to the ground, and Robert steps in with a long knife designed specifically for this purpose. The knife goes into the throat, severing the major blood vessels. The sound the pig makes is something you'll hear in your sleep for weeks. Blood erupts in a pulsing fountain, and several people are positioned with tubs to catch as much as possible because blood is valuable. It'll be made into blood sausage, blood pudding, used for various food preparations. Nothing goes to waste. Everything is used. The pig's struggles weaken quickly as blood loss does its work. Within a minute, maybe two, it's over. The body is still twitching, nerve reflexes, but the pig is dead. You've witnessed death before, you've been present for dozens of slaughters, but it never becomes routine. There's something primal and disturbing about watching a creature die violently, even when you understand it's necessary for survival. But there's no time for contemplation or squeamishness. Robert is already directing the next steps. The carcass needs to be moved to the scalding area, where boiling water will loosen the hair so it can be scraped off. You and the others are hauling the dead weight. 250 pounds of fresh carcass is incredibly heavy, toward the fire pits where massive cauldrons of water are heating. The scalding process is miserable work. The water needs to be hot enough to loosen hair, but not so hot it cooks the skin. You're ladling boiling water over the carcass, the steam rising in clouds that mix with the lingering smell of blood and pig. Then comes the scraping, using metal scrapers or even sharpened stones to remove the bristly hair. Your hands are getting scalded from the hot water and the still warm carcass. But you keep working because stopping means falling behind schedule, and there are 11 more pigs to process today. Once the carcass is scraped clean, medieval people didn't waste pig skin the way modern processing does. It was used for leather, for protective aprons, for various purposes. It's hoisted up on a wooden frame for butchering. This is where Robert's expertise becomes crucial. He knows exactly where to make cuts to separate the carcass into usable portions. The hams, the shoulders, the ribs, the belly for bacon, the head for various preparations, the trotters, the tail, literally every part of the animal. Historians have documented that medieval butchery was remarkably efficient, with virtually zero waste. The organs were used: liver, heart, kidneys, even the lungs were made into various dishes. The intestines were cleaned and used as sausage casings. The stomach lining was used. The bladder was cleaned and used for storage. Bones were boiled for broth, then given to dogs or ground into meal. Even the blood, as mentioned, was a valuable ingredient. The only things that might be discarded were genuinely diseased organs or parts too damaged to be useful. While Robert is butchering the first carcass, you and Thomas are already wrestling the second pig toward the slaughter area. This one is a sow, slightly smaller but equally uncooperative. The process repeats. The struggle to control the animal, the restraint, the knife, the blood collection, the death, the scalding, the scraping, the butchering. Over and over, 12 times today, an industrial-scale meat processing operation powered entirely by human muscle and medieval technology. By the third pig, you're covered in blood. It's on your clothes, your hands, your face where you've wiped sweat with blood-stained hands. The smell is overwhelming. Fresh blood has a sharp, metallic odor that's different from the usual pig farm smells but equally pervasive. Mixed with the smell of boiling water, singed pig hair, and fresh entrails being removed from carcasses, it creates an olfactory experience that would make a modern person vomit immediately. You're not modern. You're medieval and desperately poor, which means your threshold for disgusting experiences is several orders of magnitude higher. You keep working. The work is also dangerous in ways beyond the obvious. The knives are sharp, they have to be for effective butchering, and you're working with slippery blood-covered surfaces, tired muscles, and diminishing concentration as the day wears on. One of the village recruits, a young man named Peter, slips on blood-slicked ground and falls hard, gashing his arm on a butchering table edge. The wound is deep and bleeding freely. There's a brief pause while someone, not a medical professional, those don't exist for peasants, just someone with basic practical knowledge, examines the wound, determines it's not immediately life-threatening, and binds it with cloth torn from someone's already filthy tunic. Peter is told to sit down and apply pressure, and work continues. There's no concept of stopping operations for a worker injury unless the worker literally cannot continue. The pigs need processing, Time is limited, and individual suffering is unfortunate, but not sufficient reason to halt collective productivity. By midday, 6 pigs are dead and being processed. The butchering area looks like a battlefield. Blood is pooled on the ground. Fly populations are approaching biblical plague proportions despite the cool weather, and various pig parts are staged in different areas. A pile of organs here, a stack of ribs there, heads lined up for separate processing, intestines in barrels waiting to be cleaned for sausage casings. You're given a brief break to eat, some bread and ale, consumed with blood-stained hands because there's no time or facility for thorough washing. The food tastes like blood because everything tastes like blood at this point. You're too exhausted to care. The afternoon continues the same pattern. Pig after pig, the same violent process repeated with numbing regularity. Your arms are shaking from exertion. Your back is screaming. You've been kicked, bitten, scratched by thrashing pigs, scalded by hot water, and cut by a knife you were using to scrape hair. A shallow cut across your thumb that's bleeding but not enough to stop working. There's a moment around pig number 9 where you're holding down a squealing sow while Robert positions his knife, and you have a flash of awareness about what you're doing. You're participating in ritualized killing, in blood sacrifice for survival. Medieval people understood this in a way modern people don't. They lived much closer to the violence inherent in eating meat. There was no grocery store with sanitized packages of bacon. There was this: the screaming, the blood, the knife, the death. The sow dies. You move on to the next task. Contemplation is a luxury you can't afford. By the time the 12th pig is processed and the sun is setting, you're so exhausted you can barely stand. The entire slaughter team looks like they've been through a war. Everyone is covered in blood and various pig fluids. Peter's arm has bled through the makeshift bandage. Thomas has a bruise forming on his face where a pig's hoof connected during a struggle. Robert has a minor burn from splashed boiling water. But the job is done. 12 pigs have been transformed from living animals into food, materials, and resources that will sustain the manor through winter. The meat will be salted, smoked, or otherwise preserved. The fat will be rendered into lard for cooking and candles. The blood products are already being prepared. The hides are being treated. The bones will be used. Nothing is wasted because waste means starvation, and medieval people couldn't afford waste. The cleanup is its own exhausting process. Blood needs to be washed away, tools need to be cleaned, equipment needs to be stored. By the time you're finally done, it's fully dark, and you've been working for about 16 hours. You trudge back to your cottage, still covered in dried blood, too tired to even properly clean yourself. Your clothes are ruined. The blood stains will never fully come out, and these will become your permanent slaughter clothes for next year. You collapse onto your sleeping pallet without even eating. You're too exhausted to eat, and fall into unconsciousness more than sleep. Tomorrow, the remaining pigs will still need feeding. The sick one will still need monitoring. All the regular work continues. But tonight, you're done. You've survived slaughter day. The meat is secured. Winter preparedness has advanced one brutal step forward. And you'll do it all again next year. Because this is medieval pig farming, where even the victories taste like blood and exhaustion. The weeks following slaughter day bring a different kind of misery. The slow, grinding realization that despite all the violence and effort of processing 12 pigs, you personally will see almost none of that meat. Welcome to the economic mathematics of feudal agriculture, where the people who produce the food are the last ones to eat it. You're standing in the cold morning air, breath visible in clouds, watching as the reeve oversees the division of preserved pork. There are hams hanging from the manor house rafters, bacon slabs wrapped in cloth, barrels of salt pork, jars of rendered lard. A wealth of protein that represents months of your labor. The Lord's household will take the majority. The church gets its tithe, 1/10 of everything, including pig products, because God apparently needs bacon. The reeve and other manor officials get their shares. Various obligations and fees consume more. What's left for you is laughably minimal. Perhaps some offal that wasn't deemed suitable for noble consumption, maybe a small portion of blood sausage, some bones for making broth, and the knowledge that you've secured your continued survival for another season. Your payment for a year of pig farming, the injuries, the disease exposure, the social stigma, the exhausting labor, might amount to enough pork to provide your family with meat once or twice a week for a few months. Maybe. This is the brutal economics of the manorial system. You don't own the pigs you raise. You don't own the land they live on. You don't even own your own labor. You owe corvée obligations, mandatory work requirements that you must fulfill before you can work for your own benefit. The system is designed to extract maximum value from your effort while providing you with the bare minimum necessary to keep you alive and working. The reeve is calling out assignments now. You're being told that next year's pig quota has been increased. The Lord wants 15 pigs ready for slaughter instead of 12. This means more work with the same resources, same facilities, same inadequate support. When you tentatively suggest that feeding 15 pigs through winter will require more fodder, the reeve's response is blunt. Figure it out. That's your job. There's no negotiation, no discussion of whether this is realistic or fair. The Lord has decided the manor needs more pork production, and your job is to make it happen regardless of practical limitations. If you fail, you'll face penalties, reduced rations, additional labor obligations, possibly physical punishment. If you succeed, your reward will be continued survival at subsistence level. The incentive structure is entirely punitive. Let's talk about what feeding pigs through a medieval winter actually means. The autumn forest foraging season is over. No more acorns and nuts to supplement their diet. The kitchen waste production drops because the manor household reduces its consumption during lean winter months. You're left trying to keep 30-plus pigs alive on stored grain, root vegetables, and whatever scraps you can scavenge. But here's the problem. That stored grain isn't yours to distribute freely. Every bushel of barley or oats you feed to pigs is a bushel that could feed humans, and in the feudal accounting system, human food, particularly for working peasants, takes priority over livestock feed. You need authorization to access the grain stores, and you'll be questioned about every measure you take. Did you really need that much? Are you sure the pigs can't survive on less? Are you perhaps stealing grain for your own consumption and blaming the pigs? The constant surveillance and suspicion grinds you down psychologically. You're trying to do an impossible job with inadequate resources while being treated as inherently dishonest. Every decision is second-guessed. Every request is scrutinized. The assumption is that you're trying to cheat the system, when in reality you're just trying to keep animals alive so they can be slaughtered for other people's benefit. Winter also means the pig enclosure becomes even more miserable. The ground freezes, creating a surface that's rock-hard and covered in frozen waste. The pig's water troughs freeze overnight, meaning you need to break ice every morning, adding another task to your pre-dawn routine. The pigs themselves are cold, huddling together for warmth, burning calories just to maintain body temperature, which means they need more food precisely when food is most scarce. You're cold too. Your cottage has a fire pit, but fuel is limited and you need to ration firewood to make it through winter. You sleep in your clothes, all of them layered together, under whatever blankets you have, which isn't many. You wake up with frost on the inside of the cottage walls. Your hands develop chilblains, painful inflammation from repeated exposure to cold. Your feet are perpetually cold and damp, and you've got a persistent cough that everyone gets during winter, and that kills a certain percentage of people each year. Medieval winters were genuinely dangerous. The combination of cold, malnutrition, disease, and exhaustion created perfect conditions for mortality. The very young and very old died disproportionately, but working-age adults died too, especially those already weakened by demanding physical labor and insufficient food. You're in a high-risk category, though you try not to think about it. Back to the economic pressures. You're also responsible for ensuring the remaining pigs breed successfully for next year. This means managing the breeding boars' access to the sows, timing breeding cycles to produce piglets at optimal times, and somehow keeping the animals healthy enough to reproduce despite marginal nutrition and stressful conditions. Pig reproduction under these circumstances is far from guaranteed. The breeding boar, a massive and aggressive animal that you've learned to treat with extreme caution, is theoretically valuable but practically expensive to maintain. He eats more than the sows, provides no immediate economic return. You can't eat him yet because you need him for breeding, and is dangerous to work around. He's already injured 2 different farmhands this year, and you're constantly calculating the risk-reward of every interaction with him. One morning, you discover one of the pregnant sows has miscarried. Medieval people didn't understand the complexities of pig reproduction, the hormonal and nutritional requirements for successful pregnancy, the stress factors that could trigger miscarriage. They just knew that sometimes sows lost their piglets, and each loss represented economic damage that would ultimately be blamed on the people managing the pigs. You're staring at the expelled fetal tissue, trying to determine if this miscarriage indicates a health problem that might affect other sows, and calculating how to report this to the reeve in a way that won't result in punishment. The conversation will inevitably include suggestions that you did something wrong, fed her improperly, allowed her to be stressed, failed to provide adequate care. The possibility that miscarriages sometimes happen for reasons beyond your control won't be seriously considered. The taxes are another constant pressure. The manorial system extracted wealth through multiple mechanisms: labor obligations, payment in kind, a percentage of everything produced, and various fees for using Lord's resources. There was Harriet, a death tax where your best animal or possession went to the Lord when you died. There was Merchet, a fee for permission to marry. There was tallage, arbitrary taxation at the Lord's discretion. The system was designed to prevent peasants from accumulating any significant wealth or independence. You're doing calculations in your head that don't add up. To meet next year's quota of 15 pigs, you need approximately 18 pigs to survive winter, accounting for normal losses, which means the current breeding needs to produce at least 10 viable piglets. But piglet survival rates are poor, maybe 50 to 60% under the best conditions, lower if winter is harsh or disease strikes. So you actually need sows to produce 20 piglets to get 10 survivors. But you only have 6 breeding sows, and they might average 6 piglets per litter, meaning 36 piglets total, but that assumes all sows successfully breed and carry to term, which historical records suggest happened only about 70% of the time. The math is depressing. You're being asked to achieve outcomes that probability and practical limitations make extremely difficult. When you fail, not if, but when, you'll be blamed personally. The structural impossibility of the task won't be acknowledged. You're just a lazy or incompetent worker who failed to fulfill your obligations. There's a moment, standing in the freezing pig enclosure, watching the pigs root through frozen ground for scraps that don't exist, where the futility feels overwhelming. You're working yourself to death to barely survive, enriching people who view you as subhuman, with no realistic prospect of improvement. This is your life. This is your children's life if you have children. This is the foreseeable future, stretching ahead until your body breaks down and you become too old or injured to work, at which point you'll become a burden dependent on charity that may or may not materialize. Some historians argue that medieval peasants didn't experience their lives as unbearably miserable because they had no framework for imagining alternatives. Others argue that peasant resistance, from minor sabotage to occasional revolts, demonstrates clear awareness of injustice and desire for change. You're probably somewhere in between, most days too exhausted to think about systemic change, but harboring a quiet, bitter understanding that the system is rigged against you. The day continues with its usual demands. You're reinforcing the shelter structures where pigs sleep, trying to provide some insulation against winter cold using straw and scavenged materials. You're checking each pig for signs of illness. Winter diseases are common. Respiratory infections spread easily when animals are crowded together in enclosed spaces. You're rationing the limited food supply, trying to keep everyone alive without running out of fodder before spring. And you're thinking about next year, the increased quota, the impossible math, the constant pressure, the knowledge that no matter how hard you work, most of the benefit will go to people who have never stood in a frozen pig enclosure at dawn, have never been bitten by a panicked sow, have never experienced the grinding exhaustion of subsistence agriculture. The sun is setting, winter days are short, and you're heading back to your cottage. Another day survived. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after. The economic trap is complete. You can't afford to quit because you'd starve, you can't advance because the system prevents wealth accumulation, and you can't rebel because the consequences would be swift and brutal. You're not farming pigs for yourself. You're farming them for the system that exploits you. And the system is very, very good at exploitation. It's had centuries to perfect the art of extracting maximum value from human misery while providing just enough subsistence to keep the machinery running. Welcome to feudal economics, where the only thing you're guaranteed to harvest is exhaustion, poverty, and the knowledge that it's never going to get better. The day is finally ending. The sun has long since disappeared below the horizon, and the winter darkness is absolute. You're making your final rounds of the pig enclosure, checking one last time that water troughs aren't frozen solid, that no pig is in immediate distress, that the fence repairs from earlier are holding. Your body is operating on autopilot at this point. Muscle memory guiding you through tasks your conscious mind is too exhausted to fully process. You've been awake for approximately 16 hours. In that time, you've hauled water, mixed and distributed slop, broken up fights, treated minor injuries, mucked out waste, repaired fencing, managed breeding schedules, reported to the reeve, endured his criticism, rationed limited fodder, and worried constantly about meeting impossible quotas with inadequate resources. This is what passes for an ordinary day on the medieval pig farm. Your hands are shaking slightly as you latch the enclosure gate for the final time tonight. It's not just exhaustion. It's the cumulative effect of cold, hunger, and physical depletion that goes beyond simple tiredness into something more profound. Your body is shutting down non-essential functions to preserve energy for survival. You're cold in a way that goes deeper than skin, a chill that seems to emanate from your bones themselves. The walk back to your cottage feels longer than it did this morning. Your legs are heavy, each step requiring conscious effort. You're limping slightly. That kick from earlier, the one you barely registered at the time, has stiffened into a proper bruise that makes walking painful. You'll sleep on it and wake up even more sore, but there's no day off for recovery. Tomorrow morning, before dawn, the cycle begins again. Your cottage appears ahead, a dark shape slightly blacker than the surrounding darkness. No welcoming light in the window. You can't afford to burn a candle or keep the fire blazing while you're working. The cottage is cold when you enter, the fire reduced to barely glowing embers. You add a small piece of wood, carefully rationed because winter fuel supplies are limited, and coax the embers into reluctant flame. The warmth, when it comes, is minimal but precious. You hold your hands toward the small fire, trying to restore feeling to fingers that have gone numb from hours of work in freezing temperatures. The pain of warming cold hands is sharp and unpleasant, but you welcome it because at least it means you still have sensation, still have functional fingers that haven't succumbed to frostbite. Food. You should eat something. Your stomach has been making its complaints known for hours, but you've been too busy to address them. Your meal options are limited. Some dark bread that's hard enough to qualify as a weapon, a bit of cheese that's more mold than cheese at this point, and some thin soup you made yesterday from bones and whatever vegetables you could scavenge. It's not appetizing. It's barely food. But it's calories, and calories mean you can work tomorrow, and working tomorrow means surviving to the day after. You eat mechanically, barely tasting the food, just getting it into your body. Medieval peasant diets were chronically deficient in almost every nutrient modern nutritionists consider essential. You're perpetually on the edge of malnutrition, getting just enough to function but never enough to thrive. Your body shows it. You're thin in an unhealthy way, your teeth are bad because dental care doesn't exist, your skin has that grayish tone that comes from poor nutrition and constant exposure to filth. After eating, there's a brief moment where you consider washing, really washing, not just rinsing your hands in cold water. But that would require heating water, which requires more fuel, which requires time and energy you don't have. You compromise by rinsing your face and hands with cold water from a bucket, removing the worst of the day's accumulated grime but leaving plenty behind. You smell like pig farm, like you always do, like you always will. It's become part of your identity, inseparable from who you are. Your sleeping palate is calling. It's not comfortable. It's straw covered with rough cloth, lumpy and inadequate, but it's horizontal and it's rest. You lie down, still wearing most of your clothes because removing them would mean being even colder. Your body begins to relax, muscles unclenching after hours of tension and effort. But your mind won't shut off immediately. You're reviewing the day, cataloging problems that need addressing tomorrow. The sick pig in isolation, you didn't have time to check on it during the final rounds. Hopefully it's still alive. The pregnant sow who's due soon. The fence section that's looking increasingly unstable. The food supply that's running lower than it should be this early in winter. The reeves' demand for increased production next year. The worries circle like predatory birds, each one landing briefly before being replaced by the next. This is the mental component of poverty and overwork. You can never fully rest because there's always something else demanding attention, always another crisis brewing, always the awareness that you're one bad event away from catastrophe. Slowly, despite the anxiety, exhaustion wins. Your thoughts become less coherent, more fragmented. Images from the day blend together. Pig faces, frozen water, the reeves' disapproving expression, blood from slaughter day that was weeks ago but still appears in your half-dreams. Sleep takes you not gently but through overwhelming necessity. Your body simply stops functioning consciously. For the next few hours, not nearly enough, never enough, you'll be unconscious, recovering whatever small fraction of your energy reserves is possible in this short window. Outside, the pigs are settling into their own version of rest, huddled together for warmth in the shelter you've provided. They don't think about tomorrow. They don't worry about quotas or economics or social hierarchies. They just exist moment to moment, driven by basic needs for food, water, shelter, and safety. In some ways, you envy them their simplicity. In other ways, you're grimly aware that their existence and yours aren't as different as you'd like to think. The night deepens. The cold intensifies. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl calls. The manor house, with its multiple rooms and adequate fires and well-fed inhabitants, is warm and comfortable. The church bells, which mark the hours for those privileged enough to care about structured time, ring once. You don't hear them. You're beyond hearing, beyond awareness, submerged in the desperate unconsciousness of someone whose body has been pushed past its limits and has simply shut down in self-preservation. Tomorrow will come too soon. The rooster will crow. The pigs will need feeding. The work will continue. But for now, for these few precious hours, you're free. Free from labor, free from hunger you can consciously feel, free from the weight of impossible expectations and grinding poverty. Sleep is your only escape, your only luxury, your only respite from the relentless demands of medieval pig farming. And so you rest, there in the darkness of your cold cottage, your body slowly recovering whatever it can recover, preparing for another day of the same struggles, the same exhaustion, the same survival-level existence. This is your life. This is the life of countless medieval peasants whose names history never recorded, whose suffering was so common it barely merited mention in the chronicles written by and for the wealthy. You wouldn't have lasted a day in a medieval pig farm. The physical demands would have broken you. The smell would have overwhelmed you. The social stigma would have crushed your spirit. The economic exploitation would have filled you with rage that had no outlet. The constant surveillance and suspicion would have eroded your sense of self-worth. The grinding poverty would have revealed how much of modern life you take for granted, not just technology, but basic things like adequate food, medical care, the assumption that hard work might lead to improvement rather than just preventing starvation. Medieval pig farming was survival at its most brutal. It was humanity reduced to the bare mechanics of staying alive. Work, eat minimally, sleep inadequately, repeat until your body fails. There was no glory in it, no romance, no character-building virtue. Just hard, dirty, dangerous labor performed by people who had no choice, for the benefit of people who would never acknowledge their sacrifice. The darkness holds you gently now, this cold winter night, as your breathing deepens and slows. The pigs are quiet. The village is silent. The world is at rest, briefly, before dawn breaks and demands return with renewed intensity. Tomorrow you'll wake up sore, hungry, and cold. You'll drag yourself to the pig enclosure before the sun rises. You'll perform the same tasks you performed today and yesterday and every day before that. The pigs will need feeding. The waste will need managing. The problems will need solving. The reeve will need appeasing. The system will demand your labor while providing minimal sustenance in return. But tomorrow is tomorrow's problem. Tonight you sleep, and in this moment of unconscious peace, you're as free as a medieval pig farmer ever gets to be. It's not much, but it's something. And sometimes, something is enough to carry you through to the next day, and the next, and the next, until the long chain of days finally ends and you're released from the burdens of this difficult, dirty, thankless life. The fire burns lower. The cold creeps in. The darkness remains. And you sleep on, gathering what small reserves of strength you can, because morning will come soon, far too soon, and the pigs will be waiting, hungry as always, demanding as always, representing the continuation of labor that defines and consumes your entire existence. Rest now. Rest while you can. The medieval pig farm shows no mercy, but at least the night offers this. A few hours of oblivion, a brief escape from awareness, a small gift of unconsciousness that makes survival possible for one more day. Your breathing is steady now, deep and even. Your face, usually tight with tension and worry, has relaxed slightly in sleep. Your hands, calloused and scarred and perpetually dirty, lie still. For these few hours, you're not a pig farmer. You're not a peasant. You're not a cog in the feudal machine. You're just a human being, resting, recovering, preparing unconsciously for whatever tomorrow brings. And tomorrow will bring more of the same, because this is medieval life at its most basic. Survival repeated daily until you can't survive anymore. The pigs will outlive some of you. The system will outlive all of you. But tonight, at least, you've made it through another day. You've survived. And in the brutal arithmetic of medieval peasant life, survival is victory enough. The wind picks up outside, whistling through gaps in the cottage walls. The fire flickers and dances, casting moving shadows. The darkness wraps around everything like a blanket, cold and heavy, but also oddly protective, hiding the harsh realities that daylight will reveal again soon. Sleep well, pig farmer. You've earned this rest. Tomorrow, the struggle continues. But tonight, you're at peace, or as close to peace as your circumstances allow. And in the morning, when consciousness returns and the work begins again, at least you'll have had these hours of quiet darkness, this brief reprieve from the endless demands of keeping pigs alive so they can be slaughtered for other people's tables. The night holds you. The darkness protects you. And slowly, gently, the hours pass, carrying you toward dawn and the beginning of another day that will be almost identical to this one, and the one before it, and all the days stretching back through your entire life and forward through whatever future remains. Rest, recover, survive. That's all anyone can ask of you, and it's more than enough for now. Sweet dreams wherever you are.